And I'm live, and Candy, the wet dog, who just came in from outside, and I don't know where my darn towel is. She can go lay down in her crate where she can dry off. Gordon Cosby, as it always is, live and unscripted. Going to be talking, we're going to step in it big tonight with the conflict going on, the never ending conflict between Israel and people who typically refer to themselves as Palestinians. And we're going to get into all of it. But before I do, I have to deal with Candy or she won't give me any peace. So shake a paw, lady, and speak. All right, come on up. And Candy is looked after. I notice my battery is running a little low. Welcome to an incredibly high production value podcast, YouTube live stream. Gordon Causey, once again, 58-year-old resident of southeastern Ontario, Canada, and ex-military, wearing an old military T-shirt, the old desert tan kind. The live chat is on. We will see what happens. I'll put it on live chat instead of top chat so that none of the messages in the chat get filtered out. I like to see everything. And I'm going to be attempting to approach this issue with as little emotion as possible, recognizing, of course, that it is certainly an emotional issue for a lot of people. Like I say, incredibly high production values on my miserable, pathetic little YouTube station, channel, podcast, whatever you want to call it. So let's dive in. But before I do, a lot of preamble. If you like the content, I invite you to hit the thumb up. If you want to subscribe, I invite you to hit the button down there. And then if you want to receive notifications about when I'm going live, you need to hit the bell. That's, of course, an individual choice. If you want to be notified, you will need to hit that bell and then you'll get a notification when the live stream is going. If you want to participate, a lot of people do. I have a number of people who are regular participants, although no one right now. The live chat is empty, although there are people watching. With a contentious issue like this, a lot of people, well, let's just see where this is going to go. All right. I'm going to start off with the news. We're taking a break somewhat. I'm a Canadian, and we just had an election this past Monday, a week ago, elected new government. There's lots happening with Mark Carney. Tomorrow is slated to go down to his first official visit since being elected as Canada's prime minister, first time ever being in politics, holding an elected seat. We'll see how that goes. I'm sure I'll have something to say on that when there's more news. So, going to take a break from the hotbed of political happenings in my native Canada. Interesting. I just referred to it as my native Canada. That is going to come into play when I talk about Israel. My native Canada, our national anthem starts out, "O Canada, our home and native land." Some might take exception to a white European descended guy referring to himself, referring to Canada as his native land, but we'll get into it. There has been news articles published. I've looked at two, one by France-24 and another by CBC, Canada's Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, government owned, government funded, government subsidized media. And they're not the best journalists out there. They tend to be very pejorative, very prejudiced, very propagandistic, but it is what it is when you're a Canadian. Uh, and Eat Me, with respect to the Canadian political scene, is making a very wise comment in my estimation. She is saying that Trump couldn't care less about Carney's visit down to Washington. Trump is in the press saying he doesn't even know why he's coming. I guess he wants to discuss some things, whatever. Doors open, come on in, you can talk to me. I don't know what you want to talk about. At any rate, let's get on to Israel. So I'm going to share my screen and I'll go to the CBC News article. because what's being reported in the France-24 is very similar, but um, but um, the CBC News article is more current. It's only a few hours old, and they both cover much of the same ground. Is sharing as I like to do, and then let's do the control plus 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 to make the things readable. So let's see. How's it looking? Looks good. All right. World news. And this is Israel plans to seize Gaza under new strategy to expand military operations, officials say. Officials discuss Gaza plans on condition of anonymity. They don't want to be named. As Israel military calls up reservists. Everyone in the nation state of Israel, male and female, is required to engage in military service. And I forget the commitment. It's longer for men than it is for women. But at any rate, this story came out today, early in the morning, 6:17 a.m. Eastern time, and was last updated 7 hours ago. SRCX is writing, have you ever considered moving to the USA? You have all the characteristics of a Trump supporter. I don't deny climate change. I simply question the degree to which human activity influence climate change. And I don't, you're taking me off topic. I'll do another video at some point on climate change, but I don't deny that climate changes. I've gone through the long history that we know of, the medieval warming period, the Little Ice Age, this current warming trend that we're in, and these cyclical periods that last hundreds of years. Um, and vaccine denier, well, I didn't get the COVID vaccine. I've had every other one that I can think of. One day I'll have to pull out my old military travel immunization record. That's what they called it. And everyone knows that the COVID jabs are not immunizations because you're not immune. Uh, anyway, SRCX is just being, it's funny. You become what you hate, SRCX, and fascist. I lived through a fascist period during the COVID era when those who deny science um, basically propagandized the population to hate me and to think that I was like a Jew in 1930s Germany. 1930s Germany, Jews were said to spread typhus, that they were a threat to the health and safety of the good German people. And most of too many of the German population just went blindly along and gaslit anyone who dared to question the official government approved narratives that Jews were a subhuman race of humans, that they spread disease and that they threatened the good German people. The same thing was said about those who were smart enough to refuse the COVID vaccines, because now they're going to get sick with COVID and they're going to pass it on. But whereas the vaccinated people aren't going to get sick and they aren't going to pass it on. And we all know if you have two brain cells to rub together, SRCX, that was misinformation, disinformation. The COVID vaccines do not provide immunity to infection, and you can still transmit the disease. You want to go into it, I will. Uh, and then Eatme is saying, this is getting out of control. I think that's in respect to the article that I am sharing. Let me scroll down. Again, this is today's news, and it shows a picture. Always good to Pictures are a great way to drive emotional response, and that's what our media seems to like to do, likes to present, loaded pictures, images, videos, in order to elicit an emotional response, because that gets people to stop thinking. And it says smoke rises from Gaza after an Israeli airstrike on Saturday. Since a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas collapsed in mid March, Israel has unleashed fierce strikes on the territory that have killed hundreds. And then it cites Amir Cohen, Reuters or Reuters. I say Reuters. Here we go. Israel approved plans on Monday to seize the Gaza Strip and to stay in the Palestinian territory for an unspecified amount of time. Two Israeli officials, and again, these are individuals who shall remain anonymous. If implemented, the move would vastly expand Israel's operations there and likely draw fierce international opposition. I have no problem agreeing with that statement that if indeed Israel does seek to permanently occupy Gaza once again, that it is going to draw fierce international opposition. Does that mean that the international opposition is right? Is it a vote? Any Most people would have voted to, basically put the unvaccinated into concentration camps. That's that. If we'd had a vote, I bet you a majority of the Canadian population would have voted in favor of internment concentration camps for the unvaccinated. Anyway, the new plan, which was approved in an early morning vote by Israeli cabinet ministers, also calls for hundreds of thousands of Palestinians to move to Gaza's south. That would likely amount to their forcible displacement and exacerbate an already dire humanitarian crisis. Details of the plan were not formally announced, and its exact timing and implementation were not clear. Its approval came hours after the Israeli military chief said the army was calling up tens of thousands of reserve soldiers. The plan may be another measure by Israel to try to pressure Hamas into making concessions in ceasefire negotiations. A third person, a defense official, and again anonymous, said the new plan would not begin until after US President Donald Trump wraps up an expected visit to the Middle East this month. So I wasn't even aware that Donald Trump was planning a trip to the Middle East, but whatever. And then it goes on to say if there is no hostage deal, because everyone should know that Hamas and their allies within the Strip continue to hold Israeli hostages. They kidnapped babies and wouldn't let them go. Anyway, if there is no hostage deal, Operation Gideon Chariots will begin with great intensity and will not stop until all its goals are achieved. That's the first time reading of this Operation Gideon Chariots. Gideon is a biblical figure who went up against the enemies of Israel with a very small force. It's a biblical story. You can check it out if you like. Might be in Kings, might be in Samuel. It's one of the books of the Bible, obviously. All three officials spoke on condition of anonymity because they were discussing military plans. It makes the point that Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005 after having occupied it for decades and then imposed a blockade on the territory along with Egypt. And for what it's worth, and I will get into this, Gaza was formerly Egyptian territory. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this point. If you want to read the rest of the article, I will leave it down. I will put it in a link in the comments along the one I think I already linked in the description to this video, the article written by France-24. And their article says Netanyahu announces intensive Gaza offensive, displacement of its population. And that was written, well, it says that it was issued today at 1631, but I don't know 1631 French time, European time, I don't know. So anyway, let me get back to my screen and see what is being written. Emi I read that comment that Nancy put up. This is getting out of control. SRCX writes, "Eat me, white female, 5'1", 300 pounds, lesbian man hater." Oh gosh, SRCX, seriously, I'm going to ignore you because you're being a pain in the rear end, and you're just baiting, and you're just engaging in juvenile 12-year-old behavior that belongs on the playground. And if you don't like that, you know what to do. Cryptomeria is writing, "The tariffs on the film." Okay. Someone going off topic, talking about Trump imposing tariffs on the motion picture, television and motion picture industry for any shows and movies being produced in places like Toronto. And EMI has already blocked a certain individual. And I'm just going to skip over SRCX because he's being a 12-year-old. And Cryptomeria is writing, "With the dismal shape of the dollar, we still have projects here." Going off topic, it's cost effective for Americans to produce TV shows, movies in Toronto because their dollar is so cheap. What else is being written? And Cryptomeria is writing that wants a refund for all the donations, lots of cement that went for tunnels. I'm going to get into that. And then Sharunian, whose name keeps changing, writes, "Just came back from come back from Ajax." All right. Let's deal with the history of this land called the Gaza Strip. And I don't want to go back into antiquity. At one time, if we go back into ancient biblical times, if we go back to David and Goliath, then it's believed that the original Palestinians were from the Greek islands, from that part of the Mediterranean, from Greece, known at that time as Thrace, and they had the name Palestinian Philistines. But I'm not going back all the way into that history. I'll go back to just before the outbreak of World War One. So the early 1900s and previously into the 1800s. At that time, actually, for about 400 or 500 years, the Gaza Strip. Just going to deal with the Gaza Strip right now. The Gaza Strip was the colonial holding, the colonial power which ruled over the Gaza Strip was the Turkish Ottoman Empire. They were the colonial power that ruled over this land. And the Ottoman Empire, as I say, it was 400 or 500 years, in and around 1500 is when they became the colonial power in charge of the Gaza Strip. Again, just dealing with this one little tiny strip of land on the Mediterranean coast. And I mean, before the Ottomans had it, there were periods of Egyptian Mamluk control. There were periods of Arabian control. There were periods of European Christian control, the Crusaders, the Byzantine Empire, which broke away when the Roman Empire split into the Western Roman Empire and Eastern Roman Empire. Eastern Roman Empire became known as the Byzantine Empire, Byzantines. So this little strip of land, Gaza, has been a colonial holding of a lot of different global empires, a lot of different global powers. And when we get to the period just before World War One, it was the holding of the Ottoman Turkish Empire. Some call it the Turkish Empire, some say Ottomans. I put the two together because the Ottoman Empire was based in Turkey. And a lot of their subjects were not happy. A lot of subjects did not like being ruled by a colonial power. The Arabians on the Arabian Peninsula did not like being ruled by the Turks. If you want to get an overview of the conflict between the Ottoman Turks and the Arabians, watch that great movie with a stellar cast of Sir Alec Guinness, Peter O'Toole, Anthony Quinn, called Lawrence of Arabia. And it's reasonably accurate in terms of the history. Of course, they Hollywood things up a bit. They have to. Got to sell tickets, got to make it a movie. But it deals reasonably well with the surprise attack on Aqaba and other historical points about Lawrence of Arabia, played wonderfully by Peter O'Toole. Uh, so you have a colonial empire ruling over the Gaza Strip. And this area in Ottoman holdings, the Ottoman Empire had been in decline for a long time. It started its decline probably in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And what happens when an empire starts to collapse? It's almost, I've heard it described, and I think it's an accurate description, to say it's like when a body is going through hypothermia and everything centers around the heart and keeping the vital organs working. And hypothermia and frostbite sets in, someone loses toes and fingers, but at least their vital organs keep operating. Well, Gaza was something like a finger or a toe in an individual freezing to death, suffering from hypothermia. The outer parts of the empire fell into stark decline. And we have records of this in history. French and British diplomats visited areas like Gaza. There was a Swedish botanist who visited Gaza. Again, this during this 1800 period, where the outer holdings of this colonial Turkish empire were collapsing, and their outer holdings were atrophying. And so, what ended up happening is, well, I'll just go a little further with that. There was also, I mentioned a Swedish botanist, also famously in and around 1867, the year of Canada's birth as a nation, when we signed the Articles of Confederation. 1867, Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens, I think is his real name, Mark Twain, famous writer, Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer. He traveled to areas including Gaza, and he described it in beautiful, prose that only a writer of his renown could manage. He said that the sagebrush and the cactus, fast friends of a desolate land, are hard to be found here, or words very close to that effect. He described it, and they all described it, the diplomats, the Swedish botanist, Mark Twain. It was universally described as a desolate, sparsely populated wasteland. And that's how Gaza and the broader area around it was described. And then what happened in the late 1800s, there was a gentleman by the name of Theodore Herzl. And Theodore Herzl was a British Jew, Jewish British citizen. And he had witnessed, and incidentally, I just want to underline one point. From all accounts that I have read, Theodore Herzl was in no way, shape, or form a religious person. He was not a religious Jew. He identified as Jewish, but it was more of a cultural identification. That was his community. But he, did he keep the Sabbath? Did he celebrate Shabbat? Did he celebrate the Passover or Purim or any of the other, Jewish traditions? By all accounts, no. A very secular individual, but who again identified as Jewish. And what he put forward politically is the notion of Jews returning to the land of Israel, this notion of Zionism, Jews returning to their ancestral homeland where they had been exiled largely the largest expulsion had happened in the year 135 AD. Most seem to think it was AD 70 when the temple was destroyed, but actually there was still a very large Jewish presence in what was then called Judea, a Roman controlled, they were the colonial power ruling over the land at that time, including Gaza. And so the Jewish people had been dispersed to the four corners of the earth and and had suffered persecution even before the Holocaust. The Jews had been kicked out, summarily kicked out of France, summarily kicked out of England. You know, there had been edicts put forth, pogroms. They'd been persecuted in Russia, in Tsarist Russia. And so Theodore Herzl, looking over the long history of the Jewish people, said, you know what, the only way we are going to survive as a people is if we return to our ancestral homeland. So he was hardly a mosaic figure. And but his voice, his political mind, whatever, was able to give birth to this notion of Zionism. Now, for what it is worth, it is reported that Jews for centuries would sit around the Passover table when Jews, which is the biggest celebration on the Jewish calendar, and that's when Jews celebrate their exodus out of Egypt, out of bondage, when Moses delivered, "Let my people go." They celebrate that. Um, Now I forgot the point of what I was. Oh yes, at the Passover table they call it a seder. Jews for centuries would say next year in Jerusalem, but of course for centuries Jerusalem had gone, you know, from being Arabian controlled, Ottoman controlled, Egyptian Mamluk controlled, European Christian controlled. You know, it seemed like an impossibility, but organizations started to be formed, and pilgrims, for lack of a better word, would make the journey to Ottoman controlled Gaza and other areas. And they started to establish settlements, farms, businesses, and um, as well at this time as Jewish people came in because they had capital and because they were establishing again farms, businesses, industry. Arabians started to come into places like Gaza as well because where there's economic activity, people gravitate toward it. And as I've said, Gaza has long been something of a, you know, are there any native Gazans left? I assume the native original inhabitants of the land would have been referred to as Canaanites if we want to go back, you know, into biblical times. They would be the Canaanites, but then Greek, a Greek population moved in, these Thracians, Thrace, Thrace, and they moved in. So I'm just going to read what's being written. Emi has got a message for me saying that she is sending me a link. Enjoy it later. Uh, it was refreshing watching something made sense. Okay, I'll watch that later. Um, Cryptomiri is writing that he has lost friends in Gaza and still wants a refund. And for all that money that was invested. Um, we'll get on to that. The amount of international aid that poured into Gaza, especially post 2005, when Israel fully ceded control of the strip to the people of Gaza. They said, okay, you can have self rule. They removed all their military assets out of the Gaza Strip in 2005. I'm getting ahead though. We will get there. Uh, and SRCX, I'll say this, great, you know, wonderful sentiment, wants Jews to move to the moon. Yeah. Well, we could say, you know, you're not the only one who thought like that. There's a certain guy in Germany, born in Austria, who seemed to think the way you do, SRCX. But Cryptomerica writes, I was working on an art project with kids in the hospitals with single moms with sick kids. We wanted to show that Christians and Muslims could bring magic. It is a tragic situation what has unfolded, but we got to go through the history. Unless you go through the history, you can't understand it. Otherwise, you just go into an emotional type response, like SRCX likes to do. It just likes to default to emotion, and I don't like to do that. I like to understand things. There's a tendency to want to, in this complicated world, to assign someone and say they're all good and this person is all bad. And anyone with any reasonable amount of life experience and a few brain cells that operate well enough to, fire one against the other, and who has an IQ over better than double digit, realizes that, there's a lot of nuance in this world. What is Amy writing? Trump, Hegseth, Gabbard are all against this invasion. Bibi has gone rogue since he didn't get the US to bomb the crap out of Iran. That's an interesting way of looking at it. At any rate, and then so let me continue on, as it were. So now we get into World War One, and Britain is at war with the Axis powers, which included the Ottoman Empire. And an interesting little side note to history is that the Jewish people living in Gaza and the rest of Ottoman controlled the Holy Lands, the Jewish people under the leadership of Ben Gurion, who would later go on to become the first prime minister of Israel. Ben Gurion went to the Ottoman Empire, went to the Ottoman Turks, and said that he would raise an army that would fight alongside the Ottomans against the Western powers, against Britain and her allies. And his offer was rebuffed. Now, his offer was made with the hope that if the Ottoman Empire was successful, that they would look favorably upon creating a Jewish nation state. But the Ottoman Turks did not bite. And so eventually what ended up happening is in England, there was something, and I invite you to look this up. I'm not going to reference everything. The Jewish Brigade, something like 10,000 British soldiers of Jewish identity, because the Jewish identity is complicated. It's cultural and religious. It's an ethno it's got an ethnic component, a cultural component, and a religious component. What does it mean to be Jewish? A lot of Jewish people identify ethnically, culturally as Jewish, but they have nothing to do with Judaism. Others are all in on Judaism. Some people convert to Judaism, and it's a spiritual conversion. So it's a complicated issue, but at any rate, in and around, they were called the Jewish Brigade, and they fought in World War One under the command of the British. Obviously, they were British citizens, but they put all the Jewish soldiers into one particular brigade called the Jewish Brigade. So the British were grateful for the support they had from their Jewish population. The Jewish individuals in Britain also supported the war financially. And so Britain wanted to recompense, they wanted to pay back their Jewish supporters. They also wanted to pay back their Arabian supporters. The Arabians were allied with the British as well, because the Arabs didn't like the Ottoman Turks either. They didn't like being ruled by a foreign colonial power. And so Britain started to cut all kinds of deals to the Hashemite rulers of the Arabian Peninsula. They said, we'll give you autonomous rule. You'll have your own nation state. You can rule over it as a Hashemite kingdom. And they said to their Jewish supporters, the whole brigade, 10,000 Jewish soldiers, they issued the famous Balfour Declaration, which many will know, came toward the end of the war. I believe that the gentleman named Balfour was the UK Minister of the Interior. That's why it's named the Balfour Declaration. He was a cabinet minister in Winston Churchill's cabinet. Not not Winston Churchill, but whoever would have been, I forget. Anyway, the Balfour Declaration stated the Jewish people got from the British what they had hoped to get, Ben Gurion had hoped to get from the Ottoman Turks. And it was written to say that that Britain would look favorably upon the creation of a Jewish nation state. And that was a big boost to Zionism, this idea of reestablishing a Jewish national homeland in the Holy Land, and it would include the Gaza Strip. I always want to bring it back to Gaza. And so Jews at that point, European, North American, Caribbean, Jews from all over the world started to come back. Wow, Britain is going to win this war. They're going to have control over Gaza and the Holy Land. And it's not going to be an Ottoman holding. It's not going to be an Arabian holding. We're going to be our own nation, independent nation state, not a colonial holding of some foreign empire, as had been the case since for over 2,000 years. I mean, if we go back into biblical history, it was ruled by the Assyrians, by the Babylonians, by the Medo-Persians, by the Greeks. Always a colonial holding for so much of its history. Now it was going to be the people living in the land ruling over themselves autonomously for the first time in thousands of years. Wonderful. So Jews started to pour back into the land, and then Britain did defeat the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottomans are gone. They're no longer the governing authority over the Gaza Strip and the Holy Land. Now it's the British are the colonial governing body. So nothing has changed. However, Britain did want to keep its promise. And interestingly, they were able to keep their promise to that Hashemite dynasty that had been ruling the Arabian Peninsula. What had happened on the Arabian Peninsula, there was something of a civil war. The House of Saud went to battle with the Hashemites, and they had a bit of a civil war. Who was going to rule the Arabian Peninsula, where Arabs come from? And the House of Saud won that war. And that is why, to this day, we call it Saudi Arabia and not Hashemite Arabia. The Hashemites were deposed, but it was the Hashemite dynasty that had allied itself with the British in the fight against the Ottomans. But they didn't have anything to rule. They had lost control over the Arabian Peninsula. Well, the British and the French had created a system of mandates. There was areas deemed under French control, like Syria and Lebanon. Those were French mandates, and the British were given mandates over areas. They called one the British Mandate for Palestine. They had another one called the British Mandate for Mesopotamia. And so you had this carve up. It was called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. I'm kind of ignoring the chat right now. But if you want me to pay attention to what you're writing, I will ask you to use the @ symbol and my name, Gordon Causey, and then it will kind of stick out. Otherwise, I'm just going to leave the chat alone. So the Hashemites wanted territory to rule over. And so what the British did is they took the biggest part of their Palestinian mandate and they created a country for the Hashemites to rule over. And it became known at that time in 1920, rather in 1921. Sorry, in 1920, the mandate system, mandate for Palestine, mandate for Mesopotamia, French mandate for Lebanon, French mandate for Syria. That was formalized at a conference in an Italian city called San Remo. It was called the San Remo Conference, and they formalized this mandate system. But then in 1921, Britain took its mandate for Palestine and carved out about 3/4 of it, about 75% of the mandate. And they said, here, we're going to create a state out of our mandate for Palestine. And the Hashemites gave it the name, it was given the name, the Hashemite Kingdom of Transjordan. The reason it was called Transjordan, nothing to do with gender identity, not back then. Trans was just to refer to the fact that it was on the other side, it was on the eastern bank of the Jordan River across the Jordan. So that land, formerly part of the British Mandate for Palestine, was carved out, and we had a new nation. And then the remainder stayed with the British. They continued to rule over it. The Hashemites got the biggest part of Palestine, or the Mandate for Palestine. They were given around 75% of the entire mandate. All that was left of the mandate, including Gaza, was a small little strip of land, the total size of which is about the size of the state of New Jersey. Someone is SRCX went, no, the world is round. God. Are you 12? I mean, we did a bit of a live, and SRCX, you know, go flame someone else's station. I don't like, I'm a free speech absolutist, and even moronic, 12-year-old type comments. I don't believe in censorship. Anyway, to go on. Incidentally, there are people who believe the world is flat. Doesn't bother me. I'm not here to play this virtue signaling game. I'm smarter than you are. It's so moronic. So, leaving it there. Let's go back to history. So now we're leading up to the time of what is called the First Arab-Israeli War. So what happened is, now you have Gaza, as well as a tiny little area about the size of New Jersey, is being ruled by the British. And the Hashemites have been given a part. And now you have both Jews and Arabs living in the land, both Jews and Muslims. They're both living in the land. And the Jews are like, okay, you gave 75% of the territory to the Islamic Muslims, or to the Arabian Muslims. You promised us too. You looked after your friends, the Hashemites. Remember that Jewish brigade? Remember all the financial support we gave you during the war? Come on, it's our turn. And Britain, to their credit, Britain tried. They were trying to create a Jewish national state, fulfilling their promise to the Jews as they had fulfilled their promise to the Hashemites. The problem is, and was, that no solution could be found, because every proposal that the British made, what they did is they were going to further subdivide what remained of the mandate into another Palestinian state to go along with Jordan, and then a Jewish nation state. But the Islamic Arabians were insistent that they get it all. They said, no, there's none of the land is to go to the Jewish Palestinians. It's only to go to the Arab Islamic Palestinians. Jewish Palestinians get nothing. The Jewish Palestinians were inclined to accept the offers. They were offered, we'll divide it up this way. We'll give this part to the Islamic Arabian Palestinians and this part to the Jewish Palestinians. No, and the Arabs said, no, we want it all. And they kept trying, and then finally they gave up, and they handed the problem over to the UN. They said to the UN, you try and deal with this. And the UN actually created a map, and it gets shared around to this day. Proposed sometime, I think, in 1947, might have been 46. And it shows their proposed partition of creating a Jewish national homeland and a second Palestinian state for the Arabs. So you'd have a Jewish Palestinian state and another Arab Palestinian state. But the Arabs, now the UN, to be clear, the UN voted on it. They voted in favor of it, two-state solution. But the Arab world rejected it. And they said, no, Jewish Palestinians get nothing. And so what happened finally is that Britain announced that on May 15th, 1948, we're out of here. Goodbye. We're done governing this area. It's gone from we had it, the Ottomans had it, Egyptian Mamluks, Romans, Byzantines, every Greeks, Babylon, everyone's had this forever. We're leaving. And we'll let we'll let the people living in the land sort it out themselves. We'll let the people who are native to the land, who live there, they will decide. They will figure it out. So on May 15th, Britain left. And basically, it's like a landlord vacating, with multiple people living on a property, and the landlord basically leaving and leaving the title behind and saying, here, you guys fight over who gets title. And that's what happened. However, there were in and around roughly 800. The estimates vary. I mean, there wasn't the kind of census taking that there is now, certainly not in that region. But it's widely held that the Jewish Palestinian population at the outset of this war, May 15th, 1948, that it numbered somewhere between 718 and 800,000. So the Jewish Palestinian population somewhere between 700 and 800,000. Eatme is writing, and it's going off topic. Do you agree with sex books in grade 6 to 12-year-old library? Not to deviate the conversation, but a free speech absolutist does. The pool had a great art. That's a good point. That is a good point. Now, you can't make every single book available in a library. Impossible. We can get on to that in another video. Anyway, and I like this. I like how SRC actually says that I'm not a big fan of disinformation. And yet, and this is what people do, unfortunately, in our world. You get these double-digit IQ types, not the sharpest knives in the drawer. And you say something that's historically accurate, but they disagree with it. It hurts their feelings. And so they say, you're spreading misinformation, disinformation. And then you ask them what, and they won't tell you. They won't tell you. Everything I have laid out is verifiable. And I invite anyone, if you want to even, there's a comment field down below. Contradict me if you think I have gotten something wrong, but back yourself up. So we're in 1948 now. The British have left. There's no governing authority in Gaza or in the remainder of the British Mandate for Palestine. None. And what happened is war broke out. There are perhaps as many as 800,000 Jewish Palestinians, that would be men, women, and children, living in the land. They're residents. They occupy the land as residents of the land, and they want to establish their own country on the land they live on. And there were probably in and around 1.6, 1.7, somewhere about double the number of Jewish Palestinians. There were Arab Islamic Palestinians. There was also some Druze. There would also be some Christians, but their numbers are marginal. It's primarily Jewish and Islamic Arabians. And what happened was a large number, and most estimates put it at about 800,000, Arabian Palestinians vacated. They went to Jordan. They went to Lebanon. They got out of Dodge. They knew a war was coming, and a war did come. What happened is 5 nations of the Islamic League, or called the Arab League, 5 nations of the Arab League invaded a land grab. They wanted to add territory to their country. And what happened is Egypt invaded, Saudi Arabia invaded, Jordan invaded, Syria invaded, and Lebanon. 5 countries. And those 5 countries, if you total their population back in 1948 when the war started, their populations were in and around 30 plus million people. About 30, I went and I checked what was the estimated population for Egypt, Saudi, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, in and around 30 odd million people. And their armies were going and they were doing battle, going to war for this vacated land. And there were 800,000 Jewish Palestinians who stayed on the land. Some had been recent immigrants, some had been living there for generations, some had been living there. They'd have ancestry going back hundreds of years, maybe a millennium or two. The Jewish presence in the land, the Holy Land, Gaza, and that whole area, had never completely disappeared, even after Hadrian had enslaved everyone. Some Jews managed to remain, small rural areas out of the way. However, most historical estimates say that at times the Jewish population in Gaza and the Holy Land, that it fell below 10,000 at times. So you have about 800,000 Jewish Palestinians living in the land. They're fighting against the armies of 5 invading countries. And that war raged from May 15th, 1948, and it went all the way into March of the following year, 1949. And then over a period of time, eventually the Jewish Palestinians signed peace or armistice agreements with the invading nations. Didn't all happen on one day. You know, one week they signed with the Egyptians and Saudis, then they signed another peace agreement, armistice with the Jordanians, then with Syria and Lebanon. So over a period of probably a few weeks, that peace came to the region finally. And when the dust had settled, Jordan had managed to capture the western bank of the western bank of the Jordan River. And they were no longer called Transjordan. They had changed their name to simply Jordan. So they captured the western bank of the Jordan River. They also captured East Jerusalem. Now, they did not create a new nation state. This was a land grab. They just swallowed it up and said, this is ours. And they also ethnically cleansed out their new territory. It's theirs. To the victor goes the spoils. So they ethnically cleansed it. They displaced, forcibly or otherwise, displaced the Jewish Palestinian population. And the Jewish Palestinians went to the part that the Jewish Palestinians had won in the war. Egypt likewise captured territory. They captured the Gaza Strip. That was now Egyptian territory. The people living in the Gaza Strip were under Egyptian rule. So for the people of Gaza, to keep this focused, because that's what the news is on today, the people of Gaza after 1948 were being ruled by a colonial empire, by the Egyptian, at one time a major world empire. So they were now a colonial holding of Egypt. Prior to that, the people living in Gaza had been ruled by the colonial power of Great Britain. Prior to that, by the colonial power of the Ottomans, the Turks. So for over 500 years, they'd been a holding of somebody. And they continued now, 1948, 1949, after that war is over. Now, okay, we were under the rule of the British, and before that it was the Ottomans. Now we're under the rule of the Egyptians. Bob's your uncle. Everything's good. I love that expression, Bob's your uncle. It's old. And everything's settled. They established what are called the Green Line borders, and we have peace. Peace in the Middle East, finally. However, it didn't last. Um, and and whatever. SRCX has asked me if I've ever considered this grade school. You ever thought about wearing a cone? Like, seriously, man, you came on the live one time and, by video, and you don't look like you're 12, but you sure as heck act like it. Can you wear a cone? Anyway, let's go on. So it's 1948, 1949, actually, and the people living in the Gaza Strip are the colonial holding of the Egyptians. And Bob's your uncle, everything's good. We have peace in the Middle East, but again, it did not last. What happened? In 1967, the Egyptians under Nasser started to mount troops. They kicked out, there were UN peacekeepers who were occupying the Sinai Peninsula and the border between Israel and Egypt because they'd gone to war 1948 49. They were not friendly with each other. And Egypt kicked the UN peacekeepers out of the Sinai Peninsula and began to mount military force on the border with Israel. And then they threatened to restrict or completely cut off. They were going to completely cut off Israeli shipping, ships bound for Israel through one of their, I forget, it's called the Strait of something, the Strait of Hormuz or Suez Canal, one of these key waterways that it was vital to Israel's survival for their ability to export and import, and they were a heavy importing nation. And Nasser was basically threatening to choke them by uh, blockading, embargoing shipping from getting to Israel. And that was in 1967. And so I'm not sure if it was Ben Gurion, but the leadership of Israel said that if you blockade our shipping, that will be what is termed a casus belli, CASSUS or CASUSBELI, which is a Latin term and means basically it means a declaration of war. You've given us justification to go for war. You're mounting troops on our border with your Sinai Peninsula. You're cutting off our ships. Well, if you cut off our ships, we're going to war. And was it a bluff? Was Nasser simply calling Israel's bluff? Did he not think they had the capacity to defend themselves? I don't know. I tend to think that Nasser thought that the Israelis were weak because he called their bluff. He cut off their shipping. And then Israel was not bluffing. They launched a massive air campaign against the Egyptians. All right, here we are. Sorry about that. What happens on occasion? I live in the boonies. So the picture of the CN Tower notwithstanding, I'm a good hour and a half or so, about 100 miles, 150 kilometers or so from Toronto. There are more apple trees than there are people in my area, and my internet connection sometimes gets unstable. When that happens, I simply do that technical genius stuff that I know how to do, which is not genius level by any stretch of the imagination. About the extent of my technical skill is to turn it off and on. And that's basically what I do when my connection becomes unstable. I shut down the stream and then reconnect to it. So if you ever see me doing a stream and I go dark for a minute, give me a minute. If I stop it, without warning, I'm trying to get back, and every time I've done it now, I've been back within a minute. Now, finally, SRCX seems to be contributing something germane to the conversation that Golda Meir was the fourth prime minister of Israel, and she was from 1969 to 1974. I know that she was the prime minister during another war called the Yom Kippur War. I believe in 1967, which is where I left off, when we have this war happening, when Egypt mounted forces on the Israeli border, on the, you call, I guess, the southwestern border for Israel, the Sinai Peninsula, when they were mounting their troops and they cut off Israeli shipping to try and strangle this 20-ish-year-old country, that a war broke out. I believe the prime minister at that time was Ben Gurion, but I might be wrong. I don't know how long he was prime minister. And SRCX goes on to say that she was Israel's first and only female head of state. And it's her, she made the point very poignantly in and around that time when she was prime minister. And I think it was probably a 60 Minutes type interview and talking about the Palestinians. She said, I'm a Palestinian. Anyone who lived in the former British Mandate was Palestinian. There were Jewish Palestinians, there were Arab Muslim Palestinians, there were Druze, Druze, Palestinians, there were Christian Palestinians. Anyone, that was a placeholder name given to Gaza and the remaining part of the British Mandate. It was a placeholder name. What do we call this? We'll call it the British Mandate for Palestine. When the Ottomans ruled it, it was actually part of their Syrian province or district. There's never been a political entity referred to as Palestine. That's why I say people who refer to themselves as Palestinian. To me, that's similar to Americans claiming to be Appalachians or Appalachians, or however you want to pronounce that mountain range. Some people say the Appalachians, some say the Appalachians, whatever the case, arose by any other name. So here we are. It's this 1967 war. Gaza is ruled by Egypt, had been ruled by Britain. Before that, the Ottomans, and that covers about 500 years of history. And now Israel has gone to war. Egypt called their bluff, tried to strangle them, and Israel lost them. They call it the 6-Day War. And not only because Egypt was allied with Jordan and Syria joined in as well. So it was 3 against 1. Wasn't as bad as the first Arab-Israeli war when the 800,000 people, Jewish Palestinians living on the land, had to fight off 5 invading armies. Now there were 3, Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. And in this war, Israel won. Total victory. They defeated the Egyptians and they took from the Egyptians, same way the Egyptians had taken Gaza in that first Arab-Israeli war from 1948 to 1949. In the 1967 war, Israel took the Sinai Peninsula and Gaza. Now it's Israeli territory. When Egypt took it, it was Egyptian territory. Now Israel took it. Now it's Israeli territory, the Sinai Peninsula and the Gaza Strip. From the Jordanians, they captured the western bank of the Jordan River, what is historical Judea Samaria, and they also captured East Jerusalem, which is where everyone should know the holy where the what's it called again? The Temple Mount is, where the Al-Aqsa Mosque and Dome of the Rock are, and what is believed to be the site of the first 2 Jewish temples. The Israelis captured that, and from the Syrians, Israel captured the Golan Heights. And immediately there were calls, well, you have to give it back to them. And it was like, well, my attitude, and you don't have to agree. My attitude, I believe in to the victor go the spoils. When the British vacated the region, and Jordan, for example, took control of the western bank of the Jordan River, and they forcibly removed, they ethnically cleansed out all the Jewish population out of their newly conquered territory. No one bat an eyelash, fair enough. You won. Well, now in 1967, Israel had won, and they had taken control of the western bank of the Jordan. Judea, Samaria. They'd taken control of East Jerusalem. They'd grabbed the Golan Heights, a very strategic piece of real estate that overlooks Israel. You want that high ground. They taken that from Syria, and from Egypt, they captured Gaza, this very contentious little piece of land on the Mediterranean coast, and they captured the Sinai Peninsula. And now the people living in the Gaza Strip are under Israeli control. Had been Egyptian. Before that, it had been British. Before that, Turkish Ottoman. Now they were being ruled by the Israelis. I'm going to read what's being written and then go on. And Cryptomeric is writing something. Oh, I miss the days of You Don't Mess with the Zohan. Is that the Adam Sandler movie? I've just seen clips of it. I haven't seen the whole I haven't seen the whole thing. SRCX is bringing up a name with which I'm not familiar. Yigal Amir, a right-wing extremist, was Jewish. There are extremists of every stripe. There are extremist Christians, extremist Muslims. There are extremist Hindus, extremist pretty much everything. And unfortunately, we live in a world where the extremes tend to dominate. And that's why I'm trying to carve as just basically let's deal with the history. Gaza, the people living in Gaza post 1967, now we're under Israeli rule. They'd never been an autonomous country unto themselves at any point in history, but now they're under Israeli rule. And you have to remember, of course, that they'd been part of a war that they'd gone from being Ottoman to British, and then there was that first war where who's going to win that territory? Is it going to be the Jewish Palestinians, or is it going to be Egyptians or Saudis or someone else? And the Egyptians ended up winning it, so they came under the control of the Egyptians. They were ruled by that country. They did not like being ruled by the Jewish Palestinians. Remember that the Arab League had been dead set against Jewish Palestinians being given any territory in the land. They wanted it all. To quote the famous slogan from Hamas, they wanted it all from the river to the sea. They wanted nothing for the Jewish Palestinians. And so Israel now has control over it. And what happens is around this time, the Palestinian identity is born, because the people living in the western bank of the Jordan River, they had been Jordanian up until 1967, and the people living in Gaza had been Egyptian. Now they suddenly became Palestinian. They created a flag. They basically took Jordan's flag. Jordan was originally part of the original British mandate for Palestine anyway. So there's some logic in just co-opting their flag. All they did is they removed the star from it. The Palestinian flag, you'll have seen it many times, is a big black triangle. And on the Jordan version, there's a star or a sun, a yellow star-like, sun-like effigy in the middle of the triangle. Well, the Palestinians just took that one element out and said, this is our flag now. We are Palestinian. And so now the Palestinian identity starts to become a thing. Before they were Jordanian, before they were, under the rule of the Egyptians, now they're Palestinian, whatever. I mean, this is just history. And what happens is there start to be uprisings. They want to create a new nation, something that's never existed before. They want a new nation, an independent nation state called Palestine. And there were calls very early on, let's link these two disparaging regions together. The western bank of the Jordan River, Judea, Samaria, and the Gaza Strip. Let's unite them together and take these two populations, one former Egyptian, one former Jordanian, and let's make this new nation called Palestine. And uh, what happened in the years following that was just intifada, 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 which is the Arabic word for uprising, suicide bombing, rocket attacks, destabilize Israel. And in point of fact, when you read, Hamas hasn't come along yet. Initially, it's simply the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and they headquartered themselves in Amman, Jordan, and were kicked out of Amman, Jordan. They were kicked out of Jordan. And the reason they were kicked out of Jordan is because, as I mentioned, and you can check into this, that San Remo conference after World War One, Jordan is part of Palestine. And so the Palestinian Liberation Organization wanted to take over Jordan because Jordan's formerly Palestine as well. They wanted a new country, get rid of this Hashemite dynasty, and they're Arabians, and let's have a new Palestinian country, and we'll get everything. We'll get all of what's Jordan today and all of what's Israel. And so what the Hashemite dynasty did, the Hashemites, is they kicked the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the Palestinians, they kicked them out. And most of them ended up in Lebanon. And then Lebanon blew up into a horrendous civil war. And Beirut looks like Gaza does today. It was just sectarian fighting. And prior to this influx of Palestinians, Lebanon had historically been a predominantly Christian nation, but then with the large influx after they got kicked out of Jordan. But I'm digressing a bit. I did want to try and stay fixated on Gaza, but it's hard. It's hard to stay in that region because it plays, there are a lot of tentacles to this conflict. And so now the Gazans, people living in Gaza, are engaged along with those on the western bank of the Jordan, the people in Judea, Samaria. They're engaged in trying to destabilize the Jewish nation state, Israel, trying to destabilize it, and intifada, intifada, intifada. Then we get up to 1973 when Golda Meir, who SRCX pointed out was prime minister, and we have something called the Yom Kippur War. And the Yom Kippur War, or Yom Kippur, is it's the Day of Atonement, the Day of Forgiveness. And it is considered, it's around Rosh Hashanah during the Jewish New Year. They have their own calendar. And Yom Kippur is considered the most solemn day on the Jewish calendar. And this all happens in and around the Passover season, by the way. At least I believe it does. I'm not Jewish, so anyway, I do know that Yom Kippur is called the Day of Atonement, and that it's the holiest day on the Jewish calendar. And on that day, they were attacked. A surprise attack was launched. Egypt wanted Gaza and the Sinai Peninsula back, I would guess. Jordan wanted to recapture, they wanted to, do that ethnic cleansing thing again. They wanted to recapture East Jerusalem and the western bank of the Jordan. And Syria wanted to recapture the Golan Heights. So it was a 3-against-1 attack. And in this war, in the Yom Kippur War, the Israelis did not capture any new territory, but they held on to what they had. They didn't lose any territory. Egypt, Jordan, and Syria were all defeated, and Israel was able to maintain its land holdings. So maybe the people of Gaza were hoping, yay, we're going to be Egyptian again. And maybe the people of the Western Bank were kind of saying, yay, we'll be Jordanian again. But the invading armies were defeated. And so the PLO is the main body that springs out of all this conflict. And they start pushing the Palestinian identity, both in the Middle East and broadly across the world. Yasser Arafat became a widely known individual traveled all over the world, raised billions of dollars. And so eventually, what happened was, in terms of the Gaza Strip, we get into the presidency of Jimmy Carter. And sometime in and around 1977, 78, 79, Jimmy Carter was president of the United States from 1977 was when he took the oath of office until early in the year on 1981. It was toward the end of his presidency that there was something called the Camp David Summit, which led to the Camp David Peace Accords. And he brought together Menachem Begin, who was the prime minister of Israel, along with Anwar Sadat, who was the president of Egypt, and they signed a peace agreement. And Egypt agreed to recognize, for the first time in their history, that Israel had a right to exist. And in exchange, Israel gave them back the Sinai Peninsula. The Sinai Peninsula is very sparsely populated. It's very arid, very desert-like. It borders the Negev Desert. Not a lot of people there. And Egypt took that back. There are wide reports, but I haven't come across anything that verifies this for me empirically. But there are accounts out there suggesting that Israel also wanted to give them back the Gaza Strip, but the story is that they didn't want it because an organization called the Muslim Brotherhood, which would later be involved in the Arab Spring, which destabilized many countries in the Arab world, including Egypt. But the Egyptians, Anwar Sadat and the Egyptian leadership said, no, we don't want the Gazans. We don't want those people. We'll take Sinai, but don't give us Gaza. Whatever the case, Gaza remained an Israeli holding. And again, the intifadas, the uprisings, the terrorist acts, the attempts to, wipe Israel off the map from the river to the sea continued. And then eventually we got to the year 2005. And what Israel did in that year, as noted in the CBC and the France-24 article in 2005, Israel backed out of the Gaza Strip. The Israelis had established they didn't ethnically cleanse. They didn't do what the Jordanians and Egyptians had done. After when Egypt conquered that territory in 1948-49, they ethnically cleansed it, got rid of all the Jews. Jews have never done that to Arabs. They've never ethnically cleansed an area. I tend to think that's one of the mistakes that Israel made, is that they should have done what's good for the goose is good for the gander. If it's okay for Jordan and Egypt to ethnically cleanse, former British mandate for Palestine territory, if they can conquer it and then kick out all the Jews, well, then when Israel conquers it, they should be allowed to kick out the people they don't want there. But there is something of a double standard. Israel is a Western style democracy. And so I do believe they're held to a different standard, but that's an editorial comment. At any rate, where am I? There's so much history to go through with this, and I've gone on already for an hour and 20 minutes. So 2005, Israel, in a fashion, does what Britain did. They say, we're leaving. And they all Jewish Israeli citizens living in the Gaza Strip were told to get out. We're giving it over to the people living in Gaza. It's theirs now. Get out. Some of them didn't want to go and had to be removed by force. They also removed all their military installations, infrastructure, units, whatever, and they said, it's yours. Govern it yourselves. They gave them autonomy. Now, at that time, the PLO had been going down. Yasser Arafat was long time gone. And there was a new group called the Palestinian Authority, which was believed to be somewhat militant. And there's this old adage of a house divided against itself cannot stand. And there are widespread reports that I believe that suggest that the Israelis kind of built up Hamas to be a counterbalancing force to the existing Palestinian Authority in the Gaza Strip. So let's have them fighting against each other so that they stop attacking us, basically, is what it amounted to, in my opinion. But what happened is they had an election, and 2006, 2007, and by the time we get to 2008, Hamas is now the governing authority of the Gaza Strip. They're in charge. And they start collecting billions of dollars from UN organizations, from humanitarian aid, from NGOs all around the world. Billions of dollars are flowing into the Gaza Strip. And incidentally, 2008, 2025, there hasn't been an election since. Hamas has not allowed another election since that one in 2007 or 8. I think it was 2007. So they've been in charge, coming up on 20 years now, and they have not allowed any elections since. And Israel continues to suffer from rocket attacks, um, suicide bombings, other terrorist type activity, because Hamas, in its charter, written in around 1988, they say that this is where we get from the river to the sea, that their raison d'etre, their reason for existence, is to wipe Israel off the map and to take everything over and to create, for the first time, a new Palestinian state, something that's never existed before in history, an independent nation state of Israel, devoid, getting with all the Jews either killed or driven out. That's their statement of their reason for being. It's called the Covenant of Hamas, and I'm fairly certain in stating that it came out in 1988. You can find it online. Just type Covenant of Hamas and you can read it. And their reason for existence, wipe Israel off the map. And they tried to fulfill that goal with rocket attacks, suicide bombings, terrorist acts. And so finally, eventually, in and around, and I may have the year wrong, but I believe it was sometime in and around 2021, they fenced the Gaza Strip off. And then they put in military style checkpoints. Anyone wanting to leave the Gaza Strip and to come into Israel, maybe to work or to go and visit family member who live in Jaffa on the western bank of the Jordan. Like you have to go through near militaristic style screening to ensure Israel wants to ensure that it's not a suicide bomber, that they're not carrying weaponry, that they don't have a rocket launcher hiding on them. I don't know. Plastic explosives, goodness knows, because Israel was suffering from a lot of these intifadas. A lot of innocent civilians would be killed. And then, of course, now we get up to October 6th. I hope that's the day. Was it October 6th or 7th? Too many dates rolling around in my mind. When we get to October of 2023, and then we have that horrific assault that was launched by Hamas on Israel. 1,200 or so Israeli civilians killed, around 250 Israeli and other hostages dragged back into Gaza. Hamas and their Islamic Jihad and other groups associated with them even kidnapped babies. You talk about a war crime. I don't think anyone can dispute that the kidnapping of a baby is not justified in any worldview. But maybe there are some, I don't know, who think that kidnapping babies is okay. But that's what they did. They kidnapped babies, they took them back, and they admitted kidnapping babies. And senior leadership within Hamas then put out a video that you can't even find here on YouTube anymore because it's full of genocidal hate speech. They called on the Islamic world. This is it. We're going to take it all. This is the start. This is the Al-Aqsa flood, is what they called it, because they were angry because Jews had dared to pray on the Temple Mount, which they consider a desecration of a sacred Islamic site of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. If you're Jewish, you can go onto the Temple Mount, but you're not allowed to pray. And if you pray, goodness knows, Katie barred the door. We're going to wipe you out from the river to the sea. We're going to kill you all, or drive you into the sea, drive you out. And so that gets us pretty much to the present day. And now my editorial comment on it is that I think Israel's biggest mistake when they captured the Gaza Strip from Egypt in that 1967 Six-Day War is that they should have done what the Egyptians did when they captured it after the 1949 First Arab-Israeli War. When the Egyptians captured the Gaza Strip, they ethnically cleansed it out of its Jewish population, a population they viewed as being hostile. We don't want these hostile players in our territory. Get out. That's what Egypt did. Jordan did the same thing on the western bank of the Jordan River. Well, Israel's big mistake is that they should have done the same. They should have said, it's ours now, get out, go back to Egypt, you're Egyptian. But the Egyptians ruled it as a territory. They never granted, the people living in Gaza were never given like Egyptian citizenship, whatever that would mean. It was ruled as a territory, as a holding. So it gets complicated, but my editorial view is that with Jordan, or rather with Gaza, with the western bank of the Jordan River, Judea, Samaria, with East Jerusalem, that the big mistake Israel made was not, they did not behave the way you have to behave in the Arab world. And they should have taken their cue from the Arab world. And the Arab world ethnically cleansed their territory. Well, Israel should have ethnically cleansed the area out of its population that is hostile to the nation state of Israel, and in many cases wants to see it wiped off the map from the river to the sea. That's the end of my video. And I've got a conversation going on between SRCX, who can't stay on topic. It's what kids do. They don't like what's being talked about and they can't contribute anything intelligent. They go off in a different direction. Cryptomeria is writing about something about the whole ark thing. That would be spelled, if you're talking about the Ark of the Covenant, you'd be spelling it ARK. Scripture pointing to birds. Thanks. Whatever. My video, I think, was pretty good. I think I'm going to end it now. I'm going to end it with, I am a Christian. And so I'm going to end it with a blessing that I like to end my videos with. It comes from the book of Numbers. These are lovely words in a hostile, confusing, often unpredictable world. It's always been that way. And the words are these, spoken by Aaron over God's covenant chosen people. May the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you. And may the Lord grant you peace. And hopefully I shed some light. And you're welcome to like, share, subscribe, all of the above, the things that YouTubers say. I will invite anyone to share a comment. I'm going to put a comment myself with a video where I actually reference the map of the original British mandate for Palestine, showing that it contained all of what is today Israel, including Gaza and the western bank of the Jordan River, as well as all of present-day Jordan. That was the original Palestinian mandate. And me enjoyed it, said it was educational. And Sharunian says, wish me a good night. And I'll bless you all. It's so funny. We live in this world, symbols. Found out, like, to me, this means okay, or it means in basketball, a 3-pointer. That's what the ref will go like that when Steph Curry hits one from downtown. They go like that. Jose Calderon of the Raptors used to do it. And now I find out that it's got a couple meanings. One, white power. I found out someone said it's a racist thing because that's the W and this is power. I want you to know it does not mean that to me. And there's another thing it's supposed to mean. To me, it just means, okay, have a good night. So God bless. And We'll see you the next time. Cheers.